Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere dusty, dangerous, and way too confident in its own legend, the Wild West. Picture this, the sun's barely up, but already the horizon shimmers like molten glass. You stand there, boots sinking into powder-dry dirt, squinting through the haze. There's a tumbleweed rolling by, some distant hooves, and the faint twang of a harmonica from a saloon that hasn't cleaned its glasses since the Civil War. You can practically taste the grit on your tongue, and you, brave traveler of modern comfort, you probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air hits you first in, parched, like opening an oven door you didn't realize was on. Your phone, if you had one, would already be gasping for battery under this kind of heat. You tug at your collar and scan the horizon, expecting a gas station or even a humble diner. Nope. The nearest thing resembling shade is a cactus that looks like it gave up on life 2 decades ago. You're in the American frontier around the late 1800s, and survival isn't a weekend hobby. It's a full-time job with no health insurance. It's easy to think of the Wild West as a venture place of cowboys, gold, and freedom. But step off your time machine and the romance evaporates faster than your sweat. The first settlers who trudged through these plains weren't outlaws or heroes. They were just desperate people chasing land, opportunity, or sometimes just the vague promise of not starving back east. The Homestead Act of 1862 had flung open the gates, offering land to anyone who could stick around long enough to improve it. Sounds nice, right? Until you realize that improve meant building a home from dirt and hope. And stick around meant fending off droughts, wild animals, and loneliness so thick it echoed. You tried walking, big mistake. Every step kicks up dust so fine it coats your teeth. Your shoes, probably something like city sneakers, are instantly useless. Real cowboys wore heavy leather boots, not for style, but survival. Rattlesnakes were less likely to bite through them. And spurs weren't just for decorations. They were tools for the horse, the original all-terrain vehicle. You start to miss sidewalks, lattes, and that mild comfort of knowing the ground won't suddenly collapse into a gopher hole. The Wild West heat wasn't just uncomfortably, it could kill. In desert territories like Arizona or New Mexico, summer temperatures soared past 110 degrees. Water wasn't guaranteed. Sometimes, settlers traveled days between wells, and when they found one, it could be contaminated or claimed by someone faster on the draw. You look around for a stream, but most of what you see are mirages, shimmering lakes that vanish when you approach, like the world's cruelest prank. Here's a mainstream fact to anchor you. The town of Tombstone, Arizona, hit its peak around 1881, a real boomtown sprung from silver mining. By then, the frontier had already taken thousands of lives from dehydration, disease, and sheer bad luck. For every successful prospector, there were hundreds buried in unmarked graves. And here's your first quirky tidbit. Cowboys sometimes stuffed pieces of raw potato in their hats to keep their heads cool. The moisture supposedly helped during long rides under the sun. Sounds ridiculous till you've been out here an hour and start eyeing your lunch bag with creative intent. You trudge on, trying to keep morale high. Maybe you whistle. Maybe you hum something dramatic, like the theme from a spaghetti western. But in truth, you're parched, dizzy, and your throat feels like you swallowed sandpaper. You spot a cluster of scrubby bushes and think, maybe, just maybe, there's water nearby. You're wrong, of course, but you learned something valuable. The land doesn't care about your optimism. Historians still argue whether the myth of the rugged individual really described life here, or if it was a clever story invented later to justify all the suffering. The truth leans toward the latter. Survival often depended on community neighbors, even if they barely liked each other. Out here, stubborn independence could get you killed faster than a rattlesnake in your boot. Speaking of which, hear it. That soft, rhythmic rattle that freezes your soul. You freeze, too. There's no snake emoji that prepares you for the real thing. You slowly turn your head, and there it is, coiled, shimmering, eyes locked. Your pulse hammers louder than the cicadas. And in that timeless, suspended moment, you understand why revolvers weren't just for duels. They were bug spray, alarm system, and peace of mind all in one. You back away, carefully, praying the snake decides you're not worth the effort. When it finally slithers off, you exhale a shaky laugh. Joke number one. Maybe it just wasn't hungry enough for a city snack. The sun climbs, your clothes cling with sweat, your lips crack, and you swear the horizon's laughing at you. The Wild West isn't vast and beautiful anymore. It's endless and indifferent. You try to remember all the survival advice you've ever heard. Stay calm, find shade, conserve energy, but there's barely any shade. And every cactus looks like it's guarding its own patch of misery. By late afternoon, your shadow stretches long and thin. You finally stumble onto a wagon, trail-grooved lines etched deep into the earth, ghosts of travelers who came before. Maybe they survived. Maybe they didn't. The ruts lead toward a cluster of low buildings, smoke curling faintly above them. Civilization, or the closest thing to it. You quicken your pace, heart pounding with hope and heat exhaustion as you draw closer. The smell hits you, manure, sweat, and something sour that might once have been whiskey. Congratulations, you've reached your first frontier town. But before you celebrate, remember, this isn't the welcoming main street of Hollywood dreams. It's a patchwork of wood, dust, and desperation, where everyone's armed, and politeness depends on how full the saloon is. You pause on the edge of town, wiping grit from your face. You survived your first day under the Wild West sun, but barely. And as the sky bleeds into orange and purple, you realize the real test is just beginning. Tomorrow, you'll face the people who call this place home. Spoiler alert, they're even harder to handle than the snakes. The first thing you notice as you step into town is the smell and honest, unfiltered wall of odors that could knock the sense out of a seasoned mule. There's manure baking in the heat, spilled beer gone sour, and something else, faintly human, faintly tragic. The Wild West wasn't known for its hygiene. Soap was precious, water scarcer, and baths. Let's just say that if someone smelled good, people got suspicious. You pull your shirt up over your nose, instantly regretting that decision because your shirt smells worse. You wander down the main street, if you can call it, that a rutted stretch of dirt lined with wooden storefronts, some leaning like they're already halfway to giving up. A sign creaks overhead. General store. Other promises fine spirits, though the missing letters suggest otherwise. There's a blacksmith hammering in the distance, sending sparks and curses into the air, and a pair of dogs wrestling over what might be a boot or someone's lunch. It's chaos, but it's alive. You're standing in a living crossroads of ambition and accident, and every face you pass tells the same story. People doing their best in a world that doesn't care. A man with a mustache wide enough to qualify as a small ecosystem tips his hat as you pass. His eyes say friendly, but his hand never leaves the gun on his hip. Welcome to the frontier, where even greetings come with trigger discipline. You nod, trying to look confident, but your sneakers squeak a sound so foreign it earns a few suspicious glances. You head toward the saloon because, honestly, where else are you supposed to go? The swinging doors creak open, revealing a haze of smoke, noise, and regret. Inside, you find the town's beating heart tour. Maybe its clogged artery. Miners, ranchers, and travelers crowd the tables. Someone's laughing too loud. Someone else is being thrown out a window, quite literally. You watch the man tumble into the street, dust himself off, and stumble right back in. Nobody bats an eye. You approach the bar, order a drink, and immediately regret it. The whiskey arrives in a chipped glass, warm and cloudy, tasting faintly of varnish. But you're thirsty, so you sip anyway. Your throat burns. Joke number 1. Congratulations, you've just swallowed 1870s paint thinner with a hint of nostalgia. The bartender, a woman with sleeves rolled up and eyes sharper than the knives she probably hides under the counter, sizes you up. New in town, she asks, polishing the glass with something that might once have been a rag. You nod. Just passing through. Hung, she says. That's what they all say. Historically, she's not wrong. Most people in these towns were passing through miners, chasing gold. Railroad workers, following tracks. Soldiers, gamblers, preachers, and outlaws. By the 1880s, places like Dodge City, Deadwood, Kay, and Tombstone were teeming with folks trying to make war fake their fortune. A few became famous. Most vanished into history, just like tumbleweeds that never got a close-up. There's a man at the corner table pitching something to the crowd. He holds up a small bottle filled with amber liquid. Dr. Fowler's elixir of eternal vigor, he declares, voice booming, guaranteed to cure gout, melancholy, baldness, and marital disappointment. The crowd chuckles, coins clink, and bottles sell. You watch, fascinated and horrified. Snake oil salesmen were the influencers of their day, and they worked fast. One in every town is promising miracles for 50 cents and delivering mostly stomach aches. Quirky tidbit time. Many of these elixirs contained alcohol, opium, or cocaine. Some were so potent that customers did feel amazing for about 15 minutes. Then they passed out or started seeing God. You step outside, needing air that doesn't smell like false hope and cheap liquor. The street's busier now. A wagon rattles past, driven by a woman in a broad hat and steely glare. Children dart between buildings, chasing a hoop with sticks, laughing like this dust bowl is paradise. And then there's the undertaker's shop with sign swaying gently. A coffin displayed out front like an ominous advertisement. You pass a horse trough, thinking about washing your face, when a man warns, don't. Dogs drink there. Sometimes people too. You nod, stepping back quickly. Historians still argue whether frontier towns were truly lawless or just felt that way because Hollywood made them louder. The truth is somewhere in between. Many towns had sheriffs or marshals, but they were underpaid, outnumbered, and frequently outgunned. The line between lawman and outlaw was blurry. Sometimes the same person played both roles. Depending on who was paying that week, you wandered toward the outskirts, where the noise fades and the dust settles. There's a row of small shacks homes, technically. Roofs patched with tin, walls stuffed with straw to block the wind. You peek into one, finding a table, a cot, and a single window. Life here wasn't comfort. It was endurance. Evenings came early in these towns. As the sun dropped, the air cooled, lanterns flickered, and music drifted from the saloon off-key, but heartfelt. You stand there, listening to the clatter and chatter, the way laughter and loneliness blend into something strangely beautiful. It's hard not to admire it, even as your stomach growls. You glance toward the stable, where travelers are bedding down for the night, rolling out blankets on hay that smells faintly alive. You'll have to find a place, too. The hotel, if you can call it that, has 3 rooms and 12 occupants. Privacy is a myth, snoring is communal, and bed bugs are inevitable as you lay down in a cot that creaks like it's plotting against you. You realize that surviving the Wild West isn't just about avoiding bullets or snakes. It's about tolerating discomfort so constant it becomes background noise. The smell, the dust, the noise, the uncertainty, all of it gnaws at you slowly, the way rust eats iron. Still, you drift into a shallow sleep, the sound of piano keys and laughter mixing with the whinny of horses outside. For a fleeting second, you think maybe you could get used to this. Then a gunshot rings out somewhere down the street, followed by shouting. And you remember comfort here is just the silence between chaos. Joke number 2. If you make it through one night without lice, you've basically won the frontier lottery. You turn over, pulling the thin blanket tighter, and tell yourself it'll get easier tomorrow. But deep down, you know better. You've survived the land. Now you'll have to survive the people in the Wild West as a way of testing what you're really made of. Morning in the Wild West doesn't so much arrive as it sneaks up on you with a glare. You wake up on that miserable cat with your back feeling like it's been introduced to the concept of gravity for the first time. Sunlight filters through the warped window boards, carrying the scent of dust, stale whiskey, and horse. The town's already stirring, boots stomping, doors slamming, a rooster crowing like it's angry about life. You rub your eyes and remind yourself, still alive, barely. You wander back outside, blinking against the brightness. The saloon from last night is still the loudest building in town. Out here, saloons weren't just bars, they were the community center, courtroom, post office, and rumor factory all rolled into one. And right now, they smell like last night's regret. But you hungry, thirsty, and curious. So you step inside again. The piano player's gone, replaced by the rhythmic thud of boots on wood. At the counter, the bartender nods at you with a smirk that says, "So, you made it through your first night, huh?" She pours you something from a jug that might once have been coffee, but now tastes like burnt mud and ambition. You sip, wince, and instantly cough. Joke number 1. Congratulations, you've just achieved enlightenment through caffeine-related trauma next to you. Okay. A man in a dusty hat and patched coat is talking fast, waving another little bottle around. "You, sir," he says, spotting you. You look like a man of discerning health. Ever tried Dr. Hollander's Life Elixir? You squint. Is that the same as the Vigor Tonic from last night? He looks offended. Absolutely not. This one's got real medicinal properties. Special formula contains essence of rattlesnake venom and prairie flower extract. You glance at the cloudy liquid and wonder how many people have died from essence before. Snake oil salesmen, literally and figuratively, were everywhere out here. They roamed from town to town, selling bottled nonsense with theatrical flair. The labels promised cures for everything from headaches to heartbreak, and sometimes even moral weakness. But mostly, they just gave people something to believe until, conned, the bottle ran out. Here's your historical fact. In 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act finally made it illegal to sell these miracle tonics without listing ingredients. Before that, anything could be in demand, often was. And for a quirky tidbit, one of the most popular medicines on the frontier contained radium. Yes, glowing radioactive radium. They thought it boosted vitality. It boosted something, all right? Mostly your odds of glowing in the dark before dying young. You politely decline the elixir and turn your attention to breakfast store. What passes for it? A plate of beans, hard bread, and something that might be bacon but smells more like regret. You eat anyway, chewing slowly, because calories are calories, and you're not exactly spoiled for choice. Across the room, a group of ranch hands are arguing about who won last night's poker game. The conversation's getting heated, voices rising, chairs scraping. You can feel it in the air, the sudden stillness that comes right before trouble. The bartender doesn't even look up. "Don't worry," she says. They usually miss on the first shot. Historians still argue whether the Wild West was truly violent or if we've just dramatized a few loud incidents. Statistically speaking, most towns had far fewer murders than modern cities. But that didn't matter to the people living. Their one bullet in the wrong place was all it took to make a legend. Sure enough, chair crashes, someone shouts, and suddenly there's a flash of steel. You duck instinctively, heart pounding. The argument fizzles fast. The barkeep fires a shotgun into the ceiling, raining splinters. "Save it for the fairground," she says. Nobody argues. You exhale slowly. Maybe that was your first almost gunfight. A fine souvenir. Later, as the sun climbs, you step out into the street again. There's a commotion near the edge of town. A wagon with a colorful banner reading, "Traveling Wonders of the American Frontier," setting up shop. A crowd gathers, farmers, kids, cowhands, even the town preacher who pretends not to be curious. You edge closer. A man in a top hat stands on a crate, shouting about a two-headed rattler and a real petrified mermaid. He charges a nickel per viewing. You pay, because why not? Inside the tent, you see a lumpy jar with something pickled inside that might have been a snake, okay? And a fish glued to a monkey's skull. Joke number 2. Barnum would have been proud. It's absurd, but it fits. The West thrived on illusion, every town trying to outdo the next with tall tales and spectacle. It wasn't just about surviving the harsh land. It was about surviving boredom. Entertainment was whatever someone could invent, sell, or shout loud enough to make a living from. By afternoon, the saloon crowd spills back into the street, everyone chasing shade and gossip. You overhear talk of a gold strike a few miles north, probably falls, but that doesn't stop the fever. The town's mood shifts. People start packing wagons, whispering about fortune. The Wild West's heartbeat was greed, pulsing beneath every bootstep. You lean against a post, feeling the weight of the day settling into your shoulders. Life here isn't about thriving, it's about enduring. Every face you see looks older than its years, carved by wind, sun, and disappointment. As the evening deepens, you return to the saloon one more time. The same bartender gives you a knowing smile. "Still here?" she asks. "Barely," you admit. "Then you're doing better than most." You nod, sip another questionable drink, and try not to think about the man selling elixirs outside or the distant thunder. That might not be weather. It might be gunfire. Out here, even the sky feels uncertain. You look around the room one last time. The laughter, the smoke, the smell, it's all part of the same strange symphony. The saloon isn't just a place to drink. It's where people cling to some illusion of normal life, even if that illusion smells like rot gut and horse sweat. You stand, stretch, and head for the door, brushing dust from your clothes. Outside, the wind kicks up again, carrying scraps of laughter, and lies down the street. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere else, a piano starts up again. And as you walk away, you realize something unsettling. The Wild West's real danger isn't the heat, the guns, or the snakes. It's how quickly you start getting used to it. Joke number 3. You came looking for adventure, but what you found was a $2 hangover and a newfound respect for air conditioning. You grin despite yourself. Take one last look at the flickering lamplight behind those swinging saloon doors and keep walking. Tomorrow, you'll try to find honest work or at least something that doesn't involve drinking varnish. But don't get your hopes up. The frontier has other plans. Morning comes with the sound of hammering metal on metal, rhythmic and relentless. You sit up, blinking, as sunlight crawls through the cracks of your makeshift lodging. The town is louder today, busier. Someone yells about a new shipment coming in. Another curses about a broken wheel. The Wild West isn't sleeping in nets, working itself raw. You step into the street, boots scuffing against packed dust. A wagon rolls by, so close you can taste the trail of grit it leaves behind. The air hums with something you haven't felt since you arrived: excitement. There's talk of gold, of new tracks being laid, of boomtown money. You follow the noise toward a row of tents just outside town, with the smell of hot tar and gunpowder mix in a way that says progress. Frontier style. A man in a soot-streaked vest waves a hammer and shouts over the din. "Railroad's coming through," he says, eyes gleaming. 2 weeks, maybe less. There'll be jobs, supplies, fresh whiskey, whole new world, friend. You nod, smiling politely. What he doesn't mention is that boomtowns like this could rise and fall faster than a bar fight One rumor of silver, and hundreds would descend overnight. One dry vein, and they'd vanish just as quickly. Ghost towns didn't come from ghosts. They came from greed that ran out of gas. You wandered through the camp. Men are sweating through their shirts, swinging pickaxes, laying steel. The air vibrates with noise, the clang of iron, the bark of orders, the hiss of steam. There's a rhythm to it, brutal but hypnotic. You think about how this line of track, just wood and metal, will one day connect entire worlds. The Transcontinental Railroad was more than a project. It was the spine of America being forged one blister at a time. Historical fact: by 1869, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads met at Promontory Summit, Utah, marked by the famous Golden Spike. It took 6 years, thousands of workers, many of them Chinese immigrants, and countless lives. The railroad didn't just unite the country, it reshaped it, leading right through the wilderness like a steel scar. You pause to watch a group of workers taking a break, their faces streaked with soot, hands wrapped in rags. They're laughing, sharing a tin of beans, passing around a dented flask. You can tell they're exhausted but proud. Every plank nailed down is survival. One more day of pay, then you notice the dynamite. A man is casually hauling a crate labeled explosive handle with care while smoking a cigar. You instinctively step back. Safety regulations, non-existent. Half of these men won't make it through the month. Joke number 1. OSHA won't exist for another 90 years so if something blows up. It's technically just Tuesday. You follow the noise farther, drawn by curiosity. On the outskirts of the camp, you find miners working a claima shallow pit where men swing shovels like it's a duel with the earth itself. Their faces are half-shadowed, their eyes wild with that peculiar fever that only gold can cause. You crouch, watch as one man pans in a murky puddle, swirling mud and water with practiced movements. For a second, sunlight glints on something shiny. He grins, a flash of teeth through grime-gold. Fever, it's real. Once it hits, there's no cure. In the late 19th century, strikes in California, Nevada, and the Black Hills pulled people west in droves. Many left behind families, farms, even entire towns. For everyone who struck it rich, thousands ended up broke, diseased, or dead. But hope's a powerful drug, and the West sold it cheap. You step closer to the pit, curiosity outweighing caution, and almost slip on the loose gravel. One of the miners chuckles. Careful there, tenderfoot. The ground bites. Tenderfoot. A newcomer. A soft one. That's you. Out here, every mistake is an education if you live long enough to learn from it. Historians still argue that boomtowns represented progress or exploitation. Some say they've built America's modern economy. Others call them monuments to greed. Both are true. What's certain is that every gold rush, every railroad, every fevered camp left a trail of broken backs and broken promises. You wipe sweat from your brow, the sun hammering your skull. The sound of an explosion cracks the air. A plume of dust rises from the ridge. The crowd cheers, but you jump half out of your skin. One worker pats your shoulder, grinning. Don't worry, city boy. Only kills you if it's close. Comforting. By noon, the heat becomes unbearable. You retreat to a makeshift mess tent where the cook is stirring something in a cauldron that smells like despair. You take a bowl, try to eat, and decide the less you think about what's floating in it, the better. Across the table, a man tells a story about a prospector who found a gold nugget, the size of a fist right, before getting trampled by its own mule. The table roars with laughter. You smile weakly because you can't tell which part is the joke. Here's your quirky tidbit. Miners sometimes used canaries, not just in coal mines, but in gold camps to test air quality. If the bird keeled over, it meant the air was bad. The catch: in the West, canaries were expensive and often died from stress anyway. One enterprising miner replaced his bird with a rat and claimed it worked just as well. History does not record how long he lived. Afternoon brings a storm, not rain, but wind. Dust devils twist across the plain, scattering tools and curses. Workers dive for cover, grabbing their hats, shielding their eyes. You cough, half blind, until the world settles again into its usual shade of misery. By sunset, the boomtown hum has changed. The saloon's louder, the laughter is sharper. Payday. Men line up for whiskey, women for work, and everyone for trouble. You stay on the sidelines, watching the same fever that built this place start to eat it alive. You spot the bartender from yesterday, hauling barrels. She catches your eye. You still breathing? She asks. Barely. You say, then you're learning. You smile. Maybe she's right. Maybe you're adapting like the dust that finds a way into everything as night falls. Okay, the horizon glows faintly from campfires and explosions, like the land itself is alive, restless, burning. You stand there, boots planted in dirt that's already claimed 1,000 dreams. You think about how easy it is to build something here and how fast it can vanish. Joke number 2. In the Wild West. You don't need fireworks. Just a drunk guy, a match, and bad judgment. You turn toward town, your muscles aching, your throat raw, but your mind wired from it all. The clang of hammers, the roar of men, the dust in your teeth. It's ugly, dangerous, and undeniably alive. Tomorrow, maybe you'll try being a cowboy, or a trader, or something that doesn't involve explosives. But, knowing your luck, the West has another surprise waiting just beyond dawn. You wake up the next morning, sore in places you didn't know existed. The racket of hammers and dynamite from the boomtown still echoes faintly in the distance. But today, you've got a new plan. You're done being a miner's bystander or a railroad snack for the sun. You're going full cowboy. It sounds romantic enough. You've seen the movies. Dusty hats, rugged independence, majestic sunsets. How hard could it be? You head for the livery stable, where the air smells of hay, sweat, and manure blend you're getting uncomfortably used to. A man with a weathered face and a mustache that looks like it survived at least one gunfight greets you with a snort. You look in to ride? You nod. Cowboy life. Thought I'd give it a try. Hey, he squints at you, then bursts out laughing. You, in those shoes. You glance down at your battered sneakers. Fair point. Within 10 minutes, you're trading them for a pair of heavy leather boots, stiff as armor and twice as uncomfortable. They cost more than you have, but apparently you can pay it off with ranch work. That sounds easy enough until you remember the Wild West definition of work often involves bleeding. Next comes the hat. Wide brim, rough felt, smells faintly of sweat and ambition. You put it on and instantly feel cooler figuratively, not literally. The sun still cooks your neck like a skillet. Joke number 1. Congratulations. You've unlocked hard mode for sunburn. You're introduced to your hoarse, massive, suspicious-looking creature named Daisy. You laugh at the name, and Daisy snorts like she's already planning revenge. You put one foot in the stirrup, swing up, can't immediately realize that riding is 90% pain and 10% pretending you're fine. The stable hand chuckles. Don't worry, you'll get used to it in a few weeks. You wheeze as Daisy lurches forward. Yup, he says. If you live that long, you ride out of town, the wind whipping your face, your body bouncing like you're in a contest for least graceful rider alive. The landscape stretches out in every direction. Open prairie, endless sky, a world that feels both free and terrifying. You spot a herd of cattle in the distance, tiny brown dots moving in rhythm. That's where you're headed, to help with the roundup. Here's your historical fact for the ride. The average cowboy earned about $30 a month in the late 1800s. That's roughly $1 a day for 18-hour shifts. Unpredictable weather, and the constant risk of death by stampede, snakebite, or boredom when you finally reach the herd. The Fomena, tall man with skin like tanned leather, gives you a quick nod. "You're late," he says. "Sorry," you reply. "My horse hates me. She's got good judgment." Then the work begins fast. You're handed a rope and told to keep the stragglers in line. Easy in theory. In practice, cows are chaotic creatures with no respect for your authority. You yell, wave, and nearly fall off Daisy twice before one steer charges straight towards you. Your life flashes before your eyes, mostly scenes of you making bad decisions. The foreman gallops over, swings his lasso with impossible precision, and yanks the animal off course. You blink, you die, he mutters. You nod shakily. Try not to blink ever again. Quirky tidbit time. Cowboys actually hated being called cowboys. The term was sometimes used as an insult. Cowhand or ranch hand was preferred. Cowboy only became romanticized later, and dime novels and Wild West shows turned them into mythic heroes instead of overworked farmhands. Hours pass. The sun feels heavier with every breath. Sweat trickles down your spine. Dust sticks to your lips, and your legs feel like they've been replaced with soggy noodles. Every once in a while, you hear coyotes howling in the distance, and the cattle respond with low, nervous moves. You start to understand the rhythm of it, all the movement, the tension, the quiet communication between rider and herd. It's almost beautiful, in a way that also smells terrible. Historians still argue whether the cowboys' reputation for freedom and adventure was deserved. Some say they were America's last true romantics, taming the wilderness. Others argue they were exploited, laborers, sleep-deprived, underpaid, and anonymous. The truth, as usual, rides somewhere in between. At midday, you stop for lunch, beans and hardtack. Hardtack, if you've never had the pleasure, is a cracker designed to outlast human civilization. You try to bite it and nearly break a tooth. One of the ranchers laughs. "Soak it in coffee first," he advises. You dunk it and watch it slowly soften, like old wood turning to mush. Delicious. Joke number 2. The Wild West diet, because who needs taste buds when you have character? As you eat, the foreman shares stories about cattle drives stretching for months, moving herds from Texas to Kansas, about nights sleeping under the stars, storms that could wipe out a week's work in minutes, and outlaws who'd steal your herd or your boots while you slept. You listen wide-eyed, realizing that cowboy wasn't just a job. It was a test of endurance wrapped in dust and danger. Later, you help corral a calf that strayed too far. You lean over, grab the rope, just like you saw, and promptly fall face first into mud. The men roar with laughter. One helps you up. "Don't worry," he says. "You're part of the crew now." Everyone eats dirt eventually. By evening, the herd's settled. You sit by the fire, nursing sore muscles and a mug of coffee, strong enough to wake the dead. The men talk quietly, the crackle of flames mixing with the low rumble of the cattle. The stars come out huge, cold, endless. For a moment, you understand why people romanticized this life. It's lonely, brutal, but honest. The foreman passes you a flask. "You did all right," he says. "Didn't die, didn't cry. That's a good start," you say, taking a sip and instantly regretting it. Moonshine, liquid lightning. You hand it back, coughing. He laughs. City lungs. You grin weakly. Frontier liver. Joke number 3. You'll survive a stampede before you survive this drink. The night deepens. The wind carries the scent of sage and smoke. You lie back, staring at the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a trail you'll never finish riding. Your body aches, your clothes stink, but your heart's weirdly full. For the first time, you don't feel like a tourist. Here you feel like part of the noise. The dust, the exhaustion dot. Tomorrow, you'll wake sore again. Tomorrow, you might face a storm, or snakes, or something worse. But tonight, under that endless western sky, you finally understand. Surviving here isn't about toughness. It's about endurance and a little bit of madness. You wake before dawn, not because you want to, but Because Daisy, the horse who now tolerates you out of pity, decides it's time. The air is cold, almost gentle before the day's heat arrives. And the prairie around you hums with that eerie pre-sunrise quiet. You stretch, feeling every bruise from yesterday's cowboy debut, and realize that what you need right now isn't more catalyts, caffeine, civilization, and maybe a day when nothing tries to kill you. Spoiler, the Wild West doesn't do nothing tries to kill you. You ride back toward town, guided by the first pink hints of sunrise. The saloon's still there, half asleep, but alive. The soft plunk of piano keys leaks through the doors. Probably someone practicing before the morning drinkers shuffle in. As you tie Daisy outside, you notice a crowd forming near the center of town. The tension in the air is sharp, like static before a storm. You edge closer. Two men are standing about 20 paces apart, hands hovering near their holsters, faces carved from granite. The crowd's whispering, names, bets, curses. You recognize one of them from the saloon, the loud one from last night's poker game. The others, older, calmer, like a black coat that says professional killer more than accountant. You've wandered into your first shootout. Joke number 1. Congratulations. You're about to witness the Wild West's version of customer service complaints. The younger man spits in the dust. You cheated me, Jeb. The older man, Jeb, apparently tilts his head. If I cheated, you'd be dead already. Somebody in the crowd snickers. The younger man's hand twitches. For a moment, everything slows. The wind dies. The town holds its breath, and even the horses seem to know what's coming. Then, 2 flashes of light, 2 cracks of thunder, and it's over. Jeb stands. The other man doesn't. A murmur ripples through the crowd. Nobody screams. Nobody faints. The sheriff, if that's what he is, steps forward, pokes the fallen man with a boot, and says he drew first. Case closed. The body's dragged off. Conversation resumes. Someone starts sweeping the dirt like it's just another morning chore. You stand frozen, heart pounding. The speed of it, the finalities, nothing like the movies. There's no slow motion tumble, no dramatic monologue, just violence and dust. Historians still argue whether gunfights like this were as common as legends suggest. Some claim they were rare, exaggerated by dime novels. Others say they happened often, but were too grim for romantic retelling. The truth, again, lies in that gray middle ground. Violence wasn't an event, it was a background condition. You duck into the saloon, needing a drink you won't finish. The bartender's same sharp woman slides you a glass before you ask. You look like you've seen a ghost, she says. Something like that. Don't worry. First one's the worst. After that, it's just noise. That line sticks with you, echoing long after you leave. Outside, the street's mostly clear again, though a patch of blood darkens the dust. You catch sight of Jeb leaning against a post, cleaning his revolver like he's polishing a teacup. You want to ask him how he stays calm, but something in his eyes says don't. He glances your way anyway. Ain't about quick hands, he says quietly, as if reading your thoughts. It's about steady ones. He holsters the weapon and walks off. You stare after him, wondering what it takes to live in a world where life and death are decided by reflex, and more hauntingly, what it takes to sleep after that. Here's your historical fact. In 1881, the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral lasted about 30 seconds. 30 seconds. 3 men dead, 3 wounded, and decades of myth born from half a minute of chaos. Quirky tidbit time. Some gunfighters actually used hair triggers, customized revolvers, so sensitive they'd fire with barely a breath of pressure. One famous marksman claimed his gun went off once because a fly landed on it. Historians debate whether that story's true or just poetic exaggeration. But it sums up the danger nicely. You spend the rest of the morning wandering the outskirts of town, lost in thought. The desert stretches endless and indifferent, same as ever. But now you see it differently, how this landscape breeds both freedom and fear in equal measure. By midday, it heats back, pressing down on you like a punishment. You find a patch of shade behind the general's door and sit, watching people pass, a preacher in a sweat-stained collar, a woman leading a mule loaded with laundry, a group of kids chasing a hoop with sticks. Life continues, even after blood dries. That's the secret of the West that keeps moving. Doesn't mourn, doesn't pause. As the day fades, you find yourself at the edge of town again. A few ranchers are practicing their aim, bottles lined up on fence posts. One of them waves you over. You ever shoot? You hesitate, then take the offered revolver. It's heavier than you expected, cold, untrustworthy. You aim at the nearest bottle, squeeze the trigger and nearly drop the gun from the kickback. The bottle survives. Your pride doesn't. They laugh good-naturedly. Takes time, one says, and patience. Mostly patience. You hand the revolver back carefully, muttering, or a death wish. He grins. Same thing out here. Joke number 2. The Wild West, where patience and insanity are often synonyms. As night settles, you sit near the fire with the ranchers, listening to them trade stories. Some true, most not. There's talk of outlaw gangs, bounty hunters, and ghost riders who wander the desert looking for lost gold. You listen, half believing, half hoping none of it's real. Historians still argue whether men like Billy the Kid or Jesse James were villains or folk heroes. To some, they were rebels against a corrupt system. To others, just murderers with good branding. You can't decide which makes more sense, but either way, they'd have eaten you alive. You return to Daisy, scratching her behind the ears. She snorts softly, forgiving your incompetence for another day. You tie her reins, lie down under the open sky, and close your eyes. The wind whispers across the plains, cool and dry, carrying the faint echo of gunfire you can still hear in your bones. You think about Jeb's words, about steady hands and quiet nerves. Maybe that's what it takes to survive here. Not courage, not strength, just the ability to stay still when the world goes mad. Joke number 3. Meditation in the Wild West. Just you, the stars, and the possibility of getting shot before enlightenment. The night deepens. Somewhere, a coyote howls, long and low, and you drift into uneasy sleep. The West doesn't forgive, but at least it lets you rest stiff, only until the next shot rings out. Morning creeps over the prairie like a slow, reluctant yawn. You wake to the sound of sizzling bacon that isn't yours, and a stomach that's writing angry letters to your brain. The ranchers have already built a fire, their laughter low and gravelly. You drag yourself over, hopeful, only to be handed a tin cup filled with black sludge, masquerading as coffee. You sip. It tastes like regret and charcoal. Breakfast of champions. One cowboy grins. You nod weakly because your mouth's too busy negotiating peace talks with your taste buds. The bacon's long gone, but someone offers you a tin of beans instead. You pry it open with a pocket knife and dig in. They're lukewarm, mushy, and weirdly metallic. Still, hunger wins. Congratulations, you've survived cowboy cuisine for one more meal. Now, hydration. You grab your canteen, swish what's left inside, and realize it's about half full. The water's lukewarm, gritty, and faintly yellow. You glance around for a refill spot, and one of the older ranchers points toward a stream a few hundred yards away. Good luck, he says. Don't mind the frogs. The stream turns out to be more of a muddy trickle, guarded by mosquitoes and the occasional lizard. You kneel, staring at the brownish flow, and debate how badly you want to stay hydrated. Finally, you take a cautious sip. It tastes like dirt, iron, and maybe some historical bacteria. Joke number 1. Congratulations. You just drank a 19th century smoothie, 100% organic, 0% filtered. Here's your historical fact for the morning. Clean drinking water in the 1800s. Frontier was a rarity. Wells often went bad. Rivers were tainted by animal waste or mining runoff. Towns that did have cisterns usually shared them with livestock. Many settlers mixed their water with whiskey or coffee, not for flavor, but to kill whatever was living in it. You quickly understand why. Within an hour, your stomach starts to grumble in protest. Not a little rumble and "I told you so" earthquake from your intestines. You find a quiet bush, discover why people carried so much spare fabric, and emerge a humbler human. The West, where even hydration is a battle, you ride on, trying to distract yourself from your churning gut by focusing on the scenery. The land is beautiful in a bleak, punishing sort of where rolling hills, sparse brush, and distant mesas rising like the bones of the earth. You could almost forget how deadly it is. Almost by noon, you stumble upon a traveling merchant's camp. A plump man with a bowler hat and a silver tongue greets you from behind a wagon overflowing with bottles. Step right up, my friend. You look like you could use a tonic. You eye the labels. Professor Blackwell's Restorative Elixir. Dr. Goodlove's Digestive Miracle. Universal Snake Oil Remedy. You raise an eyebrow. What's it fix? He beams. Everything. Joke number 2. Because who needs a doctor when you've got optimism in a bottle? You buy one out of morbid curiosity. It costs you a day's wages. But hey, hydration innovation. You uncork it and take a small sip. It burns like fire, tastes like licorice mixed with despair, and leaves your tongue numb. What's in this? You cough? Oh, the usual. The salesman chirps. Whiskey, laudanum, a pinch of mercury, and a dash of hope. You blink. Mercury. He waves dismissively. Only a dash. You walk away, clutching your stomach, realizing that the cure might be deadlier than the disease. Historians still argue whether such tonics were outright scams or well-intentioned experiments. Either way, you've just consumed enough questionable chemistry to glow faintly in the dark. The afternoon drags on. The sun blazes overhead like a personal vendetta. You and Daisy find a bit of shade beneath a lone juniper tree. You try to nap, but the buzzing of insects and the sound of distant rattlesnakes keep your nerves twitching. You recall a story one of the ranchers told you that cowboys sometimes slept with their boots on, just in case a scorpion decided to crawl in overnight. Quirky tidbit time. That's why many cowboys shook their boots out every morning. One bad surprise, as they said, and you're dancing without music. Check your boots, just in case. Empty. For now, by late afternoon, you're back in the saddle, trotting toward a nearby settlement where you've heard there's a real cookhouse. The smell hits you before you see its smoke, grease, and something vaguely edible. Inside, rough wooden tables are crammed with miners, travelers, and one guy who looks suspiciously like he's eating stew out of a spittoon. You ordered a house special, which turns out to be salt pork, onions, and beans, again this time slightly less mushy. The cook, a large woman with forearms that could crush walnuts, grins at you. Ain't fancy, but it'll keep you standing, okay? You nod gratefully and dig in. Halfway through your meal, you overhear a group of locals arguing about a missing prospector. One insists the man was taken by outlaws. Another swears it was coyotes. A third leans in and whispers, No, it's the water. Bad spirits in the wells. Mark my words. Historians still argue whether settlers genuinely believed in such superstitions, or if they were just coping mechanisms for a world that made no sense. Out here, faith and fear often drank from the same cup. After dinner, you step outside, full but uneasy. The wind's picking up warm and dusty. You refill your canteen, again carefully this time from a rain barrel behind the kitchen. The water smells slightly better, which counts as progress. You lead Daisy toward the outskirts of town, where the stars are starting to appear, and set up camp for the night. You make a tiny fire, enough for light, but not attention. The night air cools, dry and thin. Coyotes begin their haunting chorus in the distance. joined by the occasional owl. You lean back, staring at the sky. The stars feel close enough to touch, glittering in the black vastness. The smell of smoke mixes with juniper and horsehair. It's oddly peaceful, right? Up until something rustles in the brush behind you. You freeze. Then it comes again, a low growl, followed by a flash of movement. Your hand flies to your knife, which suddenly feels very, very small. Two glowing eyes stare back at you from the dark. You make the world's least intimidating noise, something between a hiss and a squeak, and then Daisy snorts loudly, stomping the ground. The eyes vanish. The growl fades. Silence returns. You exhale, shaking. Joke number 3. Congratulations. You've just survived your first episode of Frontier Nature. Things that want you for dinner. You settle back down, pulse still racing, and listen to the night breathe. The Wild West isn't out to get you. Personally, it's just indifferent. A world where everything, from water to weather to wildlife, tests your right to exist. You pull your blanket tighter, close your eyes, and whisper to yourself, if I survive breakfast tomorrow, I'm calling that a win. Sleep doesn't come easy in the Wild West. The ground is hard, the wind is nosy, and every coyote within 10 miles seems to be auditioning for the role of harbinger of doom. Yeah. You try counting stars, but there are too many, too bright, too infinite. Out here, the sky isn't a ceiling. It's an ocean flipped upside down. You doze eventually, only to wake in a mild panic when something cold brushes your face. It's not a ghost. It's the rare, precious moisture. The air feels different now, cool and metallic. The campfire's a pile of embers, glowing like sleepy eyes. You sit up, rubbing the dust from your skin, and listen. Coyotes still call in the distance, their cries eerie and strangely rhythmic, like a song that doesn't quite end. The prairie's quiet otherwise, set for the faint rustle of grass and the occasional pop from your dying fire. This is prairie night, still, endless, and uncomfortably alive. You feed a few twigs to the coals, enough to coax a flicker of warmth, and sip what's left in your canteen. It tastes slightly less like despair tonight. You lean back against your saddle, feeling every ache from the previous days, and try to appreciate the moment. Joke number 1. Congratulations. You're now fully immersed in the authentic cowboy sleep experience, which is 10% rest and 90% paranoia. The stars pulse above you, cold and clear. You can see the Milky Way stretching like spilled milk across the dark. Somewhere out there are constellations you'll never remember the names of, though. You decide the cluster above your head looks like a fried egg. You think about how settlers crossed this land without GPS, without cell signals, without even a proper map half the time. Just faith and stubbornness and maybe a mule named Gus. Here's your historical fact. Many wagon trains and cattle drives navigated by the stars, often using Polaris, the North Star, as a fixed point. If you could find it, you could orient yourself even in total wilderness. Of course, if you couldn't find it, well, you might just end up in Mexico when you meant to go to Kansas. As you sit there, half awake, half dreaming, you hear movement again. Not coyotes, this time softer, slower. You grab your hatchet and peer into the dark. A pair of glowing dots meets your eyes. You freeze, heartbeat spiking, until you realize it's not a predator. It's a small herd of pronghorn deer grazing nearby, their pale bodies ghost-like in the moonlight. They move with impossible grace, utterly silent. For a second, you forget where you are. The Wild West isn't always violence, and chaos. It's also moments like this, when the whole world feels paused, holding its breath. You exhale quietly. The deer scatter, vanishing into the brush like smoke. When dawn finally comes, it's soft and gold. The prairie shifts colors like a slow exhale blue, 2 rows to blinding white. The first thing you notice is how cold your hands are. The second is how hungry you've become. You rummage through your pack and find half a biscuit and something that might once have been jerky. You chew anyway. You saddle up Daisy, who gives you a look that says, "You again." Then, together, you start riding. The landscape unfolds endlessly rolling hills, low valleys, scattered scrub, and the occasional lone tree that looks like it's considering giving up. By mid-morning, you find yourself at the edge of a canyon. The wind whistles through it like a flute, carrying dust and a faint scent of sage. You dismount and walk to the edge, peering down at the river winding far below. It looks peaceful from up here, though you know better. Water here can be both salvation and trap. Quirky tidbit time. Cowboys used to call certain canyons widowmakers because they'd lure men in with shade and water, only to flood without warning when it rained miles away. Flash floods, silent, fast, and deadly were the original Wild West plot twists. You take a cautious step back from the edge. You'll admire from a distance. Thanks. The ride continues. The day grows hotter. You start to sweat through your shirt, which now smells like something that died in a spice rack. Daisy flicks her tail constantly, trying to keep the flies at bay. You hum nonsense songs, just to break the monotony till you hear something unexpected. Voices, 2 men, up ahead. You rein Daisy in and listen. The words drift faintly on the breeze complaints about wages, weather, and that fool boss. You edge closer, heart thudding until you spot them. 2 ranch hands lounging by a fire, passing a bottle back and forth. You clear your throat. Mind if I join you? They glance up, sizing you instantly city clothes, sunburn, exhaustion. Then one shrugs. Sure, long as you ain't here to steal the whiskey, okay? I'm not, you say quickly. Just thirsty. He smirks. That's worse. They pass you a tin cup anyway. You take a sip and nearly choke. It's not whiskey, it's coffee. If coffee were brewed from burnt dirt and desperation, you'll get used to it, one says. Or die. Either way, problem solved. Joke number 2. Wild West hospitality come for the company. Stay for the organ damage. You trade stories for a while. They tell you about a man who once fell asleep on the trail and woke up surrounded by rattlesnakes. About how one ranch's cook swore his stew could cure heartbreak or cause it. Depending on the day, historians still argue whether cowboy camaraderie was as tight-knit as legend suggests. Some say it was deep and brotherly, forged through shared hardship. Others claim it was more practical a survival alliance among men who barely knew each other's real names. Eventually, the 2 men pack up to leave, tipping their hats. You watch them go, realizing how transient life out here is. People drift in and out like dust clouds, leaving behind only footprints and stories. The sun sinks low, painting the prairie in molten orange. You set up camp again, this time near a patch of low rocks, for shelter. The coyotes start their song earlier tonight, arising, eerie chorus that echoes across the plains. It's strangely beautiful in a haunted kind of way. You lie back, eyes half closed, listening. There's rhythm to it, calls and answers, crescendos and silences. You wonder what they're saying. Maybe they're gossiping about you. Joke number 3. Prairie coyotes, the original neighborhood watch, except louder and less helpful. You close your eyes, letting the sounds blend together, the rustle of grass, the sigh of wind, the distant howl. It's music from another world, both soothing and unnerving. The West doesn't sleep. Not really it, just shifts from one kind of danger to another. Your last thought before drifting off is that maybe, just maybe, you're starting to adapt. You can't fight the wild. You can only listen to it, breathe with it, and hope it lets you see another sunrise. By morning, you've decided you're done walking everywhere. You've been sunburned, snake-bitten by air, and serenaded by coyotes for too many nights in a row. So, naturally, you think a stagecoach sounds like an upgraded, civilized way to travel, right? Famous last thought. You make it to a dusty outpost that looks more like a mirage than a business. The sign reads, Silver Spur Stage and Freight in faded red paint. A single coach waits outside, its wheels caked with mud, its windows coated in grime, and its driver already half asleep with a cigar dangling from his lips. The horses look tired. The driver looks worse. You approach cautiously. Is this heading toward Dodge City? He squints at you, shrugs, and says, eventually, it's not exactly the confidence you were hoping for. But you've learned not to ask follow-up questions in the West unless you're ready for disappointment. You hand over your fair half of what's left of your money and he gestures toward the coach door. Inside, it's dim, cramped, and smells like old leather, sweat, and something faintly resembling pickled onions. 3 other passengers are already seated. An old woman knitting with alarming intensity, a man with a scar across his cheek, and another fellow who looks suspiciously like he's hiding something under his coat. You take a seat, knees immediately jammed against the opposite bench. The door slams, the driver shouts HYAH, and the coach lurches forward like it's trying to throw you back to last. Tuesday. Joke number 1. Congratulations, you've just boarded the original roller coaster, complete with splinters, strangers, and 0 safety bars. The first few miles aren't so bad. The wheels creak rhythmically, the horses snort, and the air smells like freedom mixed with manure. You start to relax till the road turns rough. The coach starts bouncing violently, sending you airborne every few seconds. You cling to the seat for dear life, praying your spine doesn't file for divorce. The man with the scar grins at you. First ride. Is it that obvious? You gasp as the coach hits another bump that feels like a personal insult. He chuckles. You get used to it after a few hundred miles, or you go numb. Either works, you nod, gripping the edge of the seat tighter. Your teeth chatter like you're in a snowstorm, but it's just the rhythm of travel before shock absorbers existed. Here's your historical fact. Stagecoaches were the main mode of long-distance land transport before railroads took over. They could travel roughly 70 to 120 miles per day, stopping every 10 to 15 miles at way stations to change horses. The downside: dust, noise, constant jolts, and the occasional bandit raid. The scenery outside blurs into motion-scrubbing rocks, endless horizon. Occasionally, you pass a lone rider or a herd of bison in the distance, their shapes moving like a dream across the plains. At one point, the old woman stops knitting long enough to hand you a peppermint. For your nerves, she says kindly. You thank her. It's the most comforting moment you've had all week. Then, just as you start to think you might make it to Dodge alive, the coach slows to suddenly. The horse is whinny, the driver yells, and you hear something metallic like a gun being cocked. The scarred man curses under his breath. Trouble. The driver's voice cracks from outside. Now, boys, no need for a shout, interrupts him. Then, silence. You peek out the grimy window and see them. 3 men on horseback, faces hidden behind bandanas, rifles gleaming, stagecoach robbery. Of course, the man with the scar reaches for something under his coat, but you grab his wrist. Don't, you hiss. He gives you a look, equal parts annoyance and respect. Smart. The bandits bark orders, telling everyone to get out. You step down slowly, boots crunching on gravel, hands raised. The leader, a tall man with eyes that could cut glass, saunters up and grins. Well now, what do we have here? He goes down the line, taking wallets, watches, okay? One of the woman's knitting needles for my sweetheart, he jokes. When he reaches you, he pauses, noticing your battered hat and nervous expression. Greenhorn, huh? He says. You nod. Just passing through. He smirks. Aren't we all? He pockets your last coins and tips his hat. Don't take it personal. Times are tough. Joke number 2. Even in the 1800s, customer service was about managing expectations. The bandits ride off as casually as they arrive, disappearing into the heat shimmer. The driver re-emerges from behind a rock, shaking his head. 3rd time this month, he mutters. Could have been worse. Last fella they robbed ended up walking home without his pants. You glance around. Everyone's rattled, but alive. That counts as a win. After a tense few minutes, the coach lurches forward again. The ride feels even rougher now. Maybe because your adrenaline's wearing off. Or maybe because the West just enjoys reminding you who's in charge. The scarred man leans back, lighting a cigar. First time seeing bandits. Yeah, you reply. He exhales smoke slowly. You handled it better than most. I didn't handle anything, you admit. That's the trick, he says. Sometimes surviving just means not being interesting. Historians still argue whether highway robberies were as frequent as dime novels claimed. Some say they were daily realities on remote routes. Others think they were rare but sensationalized. Either way, the fear was real enough to make every creak of a wheel sound suspicious. Hours pass. The landscape rolls by, silent and golden. Eventually, you stop at a way station, a small shack, one trough for the horses, and a man chewing tobacco behind a counter. You stretch your legs and buy a stale biscuit that could double as a weapon. It's food, technically, quirky tidbit time. Passengers on long stagecoach routes were once given printed rules by companies like Wells Fargo. Among them is don't snore loudly, don't argue politics, and if you must, chew tobacco. Spit on the leeward side. Civilization at its finest. You climb back aboard, nursing bruises and biscuit crumbs. The coach rolls on through the evening, wheels squealing. The air cools, the shadows lengthen. Soon the stars are back, those same watchful eyes from every other night. The old woman hums softly to herself. The scarred man dozes, and the quiet passenger finally reveals his secret. A small wooden flute. He plays a tune low, haunting, beautiful. The sound fills the coach like a memory. For the first time in days, you feel something like home. Joke number 3. Wild West travel, tip ring music. It's cheaper than whiskey and twice as effective for morale. You rest your head against the window, eyes heavy. Outside, the world passes by in blurs of silver moonlight and whispering grass. The stagecoach rocks you into a restless half-sleep. Every bump, another reminder that comfort didn't exist yet. Tomorrow, maybe you'll reach Dodge. Maybe you won't. Either way, you're beginning to understand in the Wild West. Survival isn't about winning gets, about enduring the ride. You make it to Dodge City the next afternoon, though you're not sure how. You tumble out of the stagecoach like a sack of potatoes with trust issues, legs trembling, spine protesting. The town spreads before you in a haze of dust and noise gun metal roofs, hitching posts, and the unmistakable smell of horses' sweat, and something faintly resembling soup gone wrong. But right now, your stomach's winning the argument over your fear. You've survived bad water, bandits, and whatever that biscuit was supposed to be. You deserve a decent meal. You wander down the main street until you find a sign that says Dr. M.L. Boone Physician, Dentist, and Barber. A strange combination, but you're curious. You step inside. The room smells faintly of whiskey and antiseptic-core. Maybe just whiskey, pretending to be antiseptic. Behind the counter stands a man in a blood-stained apron, trimming his own mustache with a straight razor. He looks up, grins, and says, "What can I do for you, friend? Haircut or surgery?" You blink. Neither. I was hoping to ask where I could find lunch. Try the boarding house 2 doors down, he says. Tell M. Doc Boone sent you. They'll overcharge you, but the stew won't kill you. He pauses, then adds cheerfully, probably, you thank him. But something about the gleam in his eye makes you hesitate. You've seen that expression before on people who've made peace with chaos. You step back into the sunlight, and curiosity wins. You turn around. Doc, how'd you end up doing all that? He chuckles. In the West Sun, everyone's a little bit of everything. Doctor, preacher, undertaker, it's mostly a matter of which tool you're holding at the time. Joke number 1 in the Wild West. Career paths were less about passion and more about who fainted last at the boarding house. You're greeted by a matronly woman with arms like battering rams and a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. She sets down a bowl of stew in front of you, thick and steaming. You hesitate, wondering if it's beef or something else. You take a bite anyway. It's edible, which feels like progress. Halfway through your meal, the woman notices you scratching your arm. She frowns. You've been out on the trail? Couple of days? Let me guess, river water. You nod, and she sighs. A coat on. I'll get Doc Boone. Wait, the barber. Same one. Before you can protest, Boone reappears, dragging a medical kit that looks older than statehood. He sits you down, rolls up your sleeve, and peers at a small rash spreading near your wrist. Ah, frontier stomach meets frontier microbes. Don't worry, I've got just the thing. He pours a shot of clear liquid into a tin cup and hands it to you. Drink this. What is it? He grins. Mostly alcohol. A touch of laudanum and a secret ingredient. What's the secret? If I told you, you'd worry. You down it in one go because refusing seems rude. The burn hits first, then a strange warmth, and finally, a sense that maybe you could run a marathon or possibly levitate. That'll fix you right up, Boone says proudly, or knock you out long enough not to care. Historians still argue whether frontier medicine was primitive or just desperate innovation. Some treatments, like herbal poultices and whiskey antiseptics, had merit. Others, like mercury tonics or bleeding, did more harm than good. But with no hospitals for miles, people took what help they could get. You thank the doctor, wobble slightly, and stagger outside for fresh air. The world seems brighter, softer, slightly sideways. You spot a barber's pole spinning lazily and realize that half the town's ailments are probably cured by placebo and pure stubbornness. A man sitting on a bench nearby chuckles at your unsteady gait. Let me guess, Boone's tonic. Maybe, you admit. He nods. He once gave me that stuff for a toothache. Didn't fix the tooth, but I forgot about it for 3 days. You laugh weakly, then sit beside him. His clothes are fine. His hat, clean a traveler, maybe. He notices your interest and says, you new around here, just passing through. Oh, watch yourself. Town's got a smallpox scare going around, and the only thing Doc Boone loves more than whiskey is quarantine. Your stomach flips. You're joking, right? He shakes his head, serious now. Nope, 2 cases last week. 1 ended bad. You suddenly feel your skin itch in places it didn't before. Joke number 2, the Wild West, where anxiety was contagious long before germs were properly understood. You decide it's time for a change of scene. So you head toward the town square. A crowd's forming around a wooden wagon with banners proclaiming Professor Abernathy's traveling wonder cure. A man in a purple coat stands atop the wagon, waving a bottle like a magician with a secret. Step right up, ladies and gentlemen. Tired, weak, plagued by melancholy, hysteria, or invisible demons. Fear not. 1 sip of Abernathy's elixir would cure all ills from bad breath to death itself. The crowd oohs and ahs. You lean against a post, curious, despite yourself. The professor takes a swig of his own concoction to prove its safety, his mustache twitching. Guaranteed results, or I'll refund your money in full, he declares. A man in the crowd shouts, you still owe me for last week's refund? Abernathy doesn't miss a beat. Ah, my dear sir, you must have taken too little. The crowd laughs. Coins clink. Canned bottles change hands. Quirky tidbit time. These so-called snake oil salesmen were the influencers of their day. Some actually used ingredients like rattlesnake fat or opium, while others sold mixtures of colored water and optimism. Historians still argue whether they were villains or simply savvy. It's businessmen filling a void in a lawless world. You buy a bottle not to drink, but as a souvenir of absurdity. It's labeled cures everything but bad luck. You're tempted to test it anyway. As night falls, you find yourself wandering toward the saloon again. The piano plays softly, voices murmur, and the air smells of whiskey and sweat. You take a seat in the corner, nursing a glass of something you can't identify. Around you, life hums, gamblers bluffing, dancers laughing, cowhands arguing about horses. You overhear a conversation at the next table. Someone telling a story about a man whose appendix burst on a cattle drive. They say Boone saved him, one claims. Nah, says another. They buried him behind a cook fire. Historians still argue about that one. The first mutters, and they all laugh. Joke number 3. In the Wild West. Your odds of surviving the surgery depended mostly on whether your doctor had already had lunch. You sip your drink, stare into its murky depths, and realize that life out here balances constantly between hope and hazard. The medicine, the food, the water, it's all a gamble. Survival doesn't just depend on courage. It depends on luck, timing, and maybe a slightly superhuman liver. You finish your drink, tip your hat to the bartender, and step out into the night. The air's cool, the stars sharp, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote yips like it's laughing at you. You smile tiredly. It's earned that right. Tomorrow, you'll keep moving. You always do. Because if there's one thing the Wild West teaches you, it's that standing still is the quickest way to die. You wake to the sound of piano keys and laughter, the scent of cheap perfume and whiskey swirling together in a fog that feels heavier than the air itself. The saloon's still half alive, even after dawn. Some folks never left, just slumped against their good intentions. You stretch, rub your eyes, and realize you're the only one here who still looks surprised by all this. You make your way to the bar. The barkeeper woman this time wipes down the counter with the authority of someone who's seen everything twice. Her sleeves are rolled, her expression unimpressed. You drinking or leaving? She asks without looking up. You blink, then gesture vaguely toward the tables where a few early risers play cards, just trying to figure out how people survive here. She laughs, a dry, dusty sound. They don't. They just last longer than the rest. It's your first real glimpse of what passes for gender roles out here, blunt, unsentimental, and built on sheer endurance. Women work as saloon owners, teachers, laundresses, midwives, and sometimes all at once. But every job, every breath, feels borrowed from a world that keeps trying to take it back. You thank her for the water because you've learned your lesson about whiskey, and she studies you for a moment. You're new, she says. Still got that maybe, I'll go home look. Maybe, you admit. She smirks. Most don't. The ones who do, don't brag about it. Joke number 1. In the Wild West, hope was considered a luxury item, sold separately from your sense of direction. At the far table, a woman in a deep crimson dress leans over a game of poker. She's magnetic calm, deliberate, with a gaze that could count cards and crush egos simultaneously. You recognize her from last night's chaos. The others at the table count hands. A banker, preacher, out of place, keep losing money and nerve in equal measure. The barkeep nods toward her. That's Miss Lila owns this place. Ooh, you blink. She does. Hum. Her husband ran off 3 years ago with a traveling choir. She bought the deed out of spite and made it profitable. Smartest thing anyone's done around here. You glance back at Leela, who catches your eye for a brief second long enough to make you feel both seen and mildly judged. She tips her hat, and you nod back awkwardly, as if you just got approval from the Queen of Resilience. Outside, the street's waking up. A preacher shouts scripture at a passing cowboy. A group of kids chase a runaway chicken. Somewhere, a blacksmith hammers rhythmically, turning steel into sparks. Life pulses here like a heartbeat made of dust and debt. You wander toward the general store, partly for curiosity, partly because it's the only building that smells remotely clean. Inside, you find the owner, a man with spectacles too small for his face, arguing with a young woman over fabric. $3 a yard. He insists. That's robbery. She snaps. My husband works for the railroad. He don't even make that in 2 days. He shrugs. Talk to him, not me. Prices are prices. You realize quickly that the women here are the backbone holding everything upright. They patch wounds, raise children, run businesses, and occasionally bury husbands all before lunch. But they're also the unseen storytellers, the ones the history books left in the margins. Mainstream historical fact. By the 1880s, women in the West actually had more legal rights than many in the East. Wyoming granted women the vote. In 1869, decades before most states followed, frontier necessity didn't care about gender. It cared about who could keep the farm alive and the children fed. Still, for every story of empowerment, there's a shadow. You overhear a hushed conversation near the store's back room, 2 men talking about a missing girl. The details blur, but the tone says enough. You slip outside again, shaken by how easily hardship hides behind the laughter and brass band swagger of frontier myth. Historians still argue whether the West was liberating or exploitative for women. Some call it a land of opportunity, others a graveyard of expectations. The truth, like most things out here, depends on who's telling it. You pass a notice board plastered with wanted posters and flyers. One reads, Dance at the Golden Spur, ladies free. Another says, School teacher needed must, no reading, arithmetic, and be armed. That one sticks with you. You imagine some young woman standing before a room of dusty children, chalk in one hand, revolver in the other, teaching fractions while keeping an eye on the door. Quirky tidbit time. A real frontier teacher named Olive Van Bibber once wrote in her diary that she taught while carrying a pistol because wolves, and sometimes men tended to wander too close to the schoolhouse. She called it multitasking before breakfast. You stop by the sheriff's office, where a few locals have gathered to gossip under the guise of civic duty. Lila's name comes up again apparently. She's as feared as she is respected. One man whispers that she once kicked a drunk out by the ear. Another swears she convinced the railroad men to route their line closer to town, just by threatening to start her own. Joke number 2. Out here, diplomacy usually came in 3 forms: money, whiskey, or the quiet conviction that you could shoot straighter than the other guy. You wander back to the saloon as dusk settles. The piano's alive again, faster this time. Lila's behind the bar now, wiping glasses with her crimson sleeves rolled up. She notices you and says, You learned anything about this place today? You think for a moment. Yeah, everyone's tougher than they look. And she grins. That's survival. Sugar. Out here, being soft's just another way of being buried early. Sit. Order a cup of coffee that tastes faintly like regret. And watch as people filter in cowhands with mud-caked boots. Women in worn shawls. A deputy with a limp and a smile. Too polite to trust. You realize this saloon isn't just a bar, it's the heartbeat of the town. It's gossip mill, therapy office, and entertainment district all rolled into one. A drunk cowboy stumbles in and tips his hat to Lila. Evening, ma'am? She narrows her eyes. You sober enough to pay this time? He chuckles nervously. Working on it. Then work faster. The room laughs. Even you do. It's the kind of laughter that's less about humor and more about holding the world at arm's length. Historians still argue whether saloon culture was purely vice or a strange form of social glue. It's easy to judge from a distance, but when life's short and the nights are long, music and a stiff drink start to feel like sacred rituals. Joke number 3. Therapy in the Wild West came in one size, served in a glass, not covered by insurance. You sip your coffee, the bitter warmth grounding you. Around you, the hum of conversation softens, the light fades, and for a moment, it almost feels like home. But deep down, you know this place would chew you up the second you stopped watching your back. You glance toward Lila again. She's lighting a lamp, the flame flickering across her face, equal parts strength and exhaustion. You suddenly understand. Surviving out here isn't about luck, it's about endurance, wit, and knowing when to smile in the face of chaos. And you're still learning. You're not even halfway through your cup of bitter coffee before you hear the shouting outside. Chairs scrape, boots pound against the saloon's floorboards, and Leela's voice cuts through the rising noise. Stay put unless you're bulletproof. You don't need to be told twice. Still, curiosity wins as it always does with you and you edge toward the doorway. Out in the street, the sheriff's there, hat tilted low, badge catching the sunlight, voice raised just enough to sound like authority. Two men stand across from each other, hands twitching near their holsters. Another duel. You've seen too many near misses in your short time here, but this one has the crowd hooked. The men glare, dust swirling around their boots like smoke from an invisible fire. The sheriff shouts, "Not here, not again." But no one listens. You lean on the railing, trying to look casual while your heart kicks like a nervous horse. Then dash BLAM. The gunfire cracks, echoing off every wall. One man drops, clutching his leg. Not dead, but close to wishing he were. The other blows on a smoking barrel like he's posing for a painting. Joke number one in the Wild West. Conflict resolution came with built-in sound effects. The sheriff stomps forward, red-faced. "That's it," he growls. "Both of you are coming with me." The victorious gunman laughs. "What for?" He's still breathing, ain't he? But the sheriff doesn't laugh back. He yanks out a pair of rusty-looking cuffs and jerks his head toward the jailhouse. "Law's law," he mutters. You follow the slow procession as they drag the wounded man toward the wooden shack proudly labeled Sheriff's Office. Inside, it's 2 cells, 1 desk, and a lot of paper that looks like it's never been read. The sheriff drops into his chair, boots on the desk, sighs deeply, and looks at you. "You got something to say, stranger?" You shake your head, but he keeps talking. "Didn't think so. Folks think law means order. Out here, it just means paperwork after the shooting's done." Mainstream historical fact. Frontier lawmen like Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and Wild Bill Hickok became legends, but most sheriffs were local volunteers juggling 20 jobs at once. Justice depended on who you knew and whether the town felt like caring that day. A few minutes later, the door slams open and the town judge strides in. He's wearing a bowler hat that's too nice for the climate, holding a Bible, a flask, and a suspiciously casual attitude. "Heard there was a disturbance," he says cheerfully. "That's one way to put it," the sheriff mutters. The judge waves dismissively. "Let's get this over with. I've got lunch waiting." Realize, too late, that you're about to witness what passes for a trial. The shooter still smug stands before the judge. "Self-defense," he insists. "You looked at me wrong." The judge nods gravely. "Reasonable." The sheriff groans. "You shot him over a card game, Amos." The judge waves a hand. Card games get tense. So absurd, you almost laugh almost. Quirky tidbit time. Historians discovered that some Western courts actually held sessions in saloons. One judge in New Mexico even accepted livestock as bail and occasionally adjourned early for whiskey breaks. "All right," the judge declares, "since the victim's not dead, I'll call it even. Pay a fine of $10 or clean horse stalls for a week." Amos grins, tosses a few coins on the desk, and struts out like he's just been knighted. The sheriff shakes his head. "Law's like a cactus here," he mutters. "It exists, but it'll still stick you when you least expect it." Historians still argue whether frontier justice was democratic improvisation or organized chaos. Some say it worked because everyone knew each other. Others say it failed because everyone did. Either way, it left deep scars and even deeper myths. As you leave the jailhouse, a young boy runs past, shouting, "They're hanging Rusty Bill at sundown." You freeze. "Wait, who?" The sheriff sighs. Horse thief. Third time. He'll dance tonight. You feel your stomach twist. Executions out here are treated like spectacles, half law, half entertainment. You try to imagine a crowd gathering with popcorn and whiskey to watch someone's life end, and you suddenly want to be anywhere else. But by sunset, curiosity drags you back toward the town square. The crowd hums with uneasy excitement. The condemned man stands on the gallows, hands bound, eyes wide but defiant. A preacher mumbles a few hurried words. The sheriff gives the signal. Can you look away? The crowd disperses slowly, muttering about justice served. You're left standing in the dust, the orange light bleeding out across the sky. For the first time, you really feel the cost of living without rules. Joke number 2. The Wild West was so lawless that even justice herself probably packed up and left for the coast. Later, you find yourself sitting outside the saloon again, trying to shake off the image. Leela joins you, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. You look like you just realized something unpleasant, she says softly. I did, you answer. Back home, we think of this place as freedom, but it feels more like everyone making up their own version of right and wrong. She nods slowly. That's about the size of it. Out here, laws, I marry you. See what you bring. You sip your drink. The warmth feels hollow. Don't mistake me, she adds. We need law, but we also need mercy. And some days, mercy's harder to find. You stare into the street. A tumbleweed rolls by, cliché and perfect. Somewhere, a dog barks, and a player piano stumbles through a tune that can't decide if it's sad or hopeful. The town moves on. It always does. That night, as lamps flicker in windows and voices fade to murmurs, you lie awake in your rented cot, thinking about what you've seen. Maybe civilization isn't built by rules. It's built by people willing to pretend rules mean something, even when they don't. You drift toward sleep, caught between fear and fascination, and think, if this is justice, you'd rather take your chances with the coyotes. Joke number 3. In the West, your best legal defense was usually distant sand, maybe a faster horse. Outside, the wind howls softly through the streets. The gallows creaks once, then goes still. The stars blink above like disinterested witnesses. You close your eyes, pretending the sound is just the town breathing. Tomorrow will come, and with it, a new brand of danger. But for now, you've learned one thing for certain out here. The law's not a shield. It's just a story people tell themselves to sleep at night. Morning in Dodge feels quieter than usual, as if the town itself is catching its breath after last night's show of justice. The gallows still stands at the edge of the square, empty now, but casting a shadow that seems longer than it should be. You can almost feel the silence it left behind, thick, uneasy. You tell yourself you're ready to leave this place behind, to put the noise and the blood and the confusion in your rearview mirror. You saddle up a rented horse, more bones than muscle, and start west. The land opens up again, wide and unforgiving. No fences, no signposts, just sky so big it feels like it could swallow you. But the deeper you ride, the more you sense another kind of story humming beneath the dust, the one no dime novel ever told. The story of the people who were already here long before you and everyone like you arrived. The wind shifts, carrying the faint smell of sage and smoke. In the distance, a few tents dot the horizon, their outlines soft against the sun. You realize it's a small native encampment, maybe Kiowa or Cheyenne. You stop, heart thudding, unsure whether to ride closer or turn away, before you can decide. A man steps out from the nearest tent, tall and quiet, eyes steady. He raises a hand, not in greeting exactly, but not in threat either. You lift your own hand slowly, awkwardly. He gestures for you to DIS-MOUNT. Joke number 1. Out here, diplomacy starts with not falling off your horse. You approach, unsure what to say. He studies you for a long moment, then nods toward the canteen at your belt. Water. You offer it to him. He drinks, hands it back, then says in a calm, even voice, "You're lost." You consider arguing, but realize it's not worth pretending. "Yeah," you admit, "trying to find my way west." He nods again. Everyone is. That's when you notice the rest of the camp women grinding corn. A few children playing near the fire, eldest seated in quiet conversation. It's peaceful, grounded, real. Not the violent caricature you've heard whispered in saloons. He gestures toward the fire. "Sit." You do? The air smells of wood smoke and stew, and for the first time in weeks, feels safe. He tells you his name Running Bear, speaks slowly, as if choosing his words carefully for your sake. "We trade sometimes with your towns," he says, "but the land grows smaller each year." You nod, unsure how to respond. Mainstream historical fact. By the 1870s, native nations across the plains were being forcibly removed from ancestral lands. Treaties were signed, then broken. Reservations grew crowded. Resources vanished. And buffalo herds, once numbering in the millions, were slaughtered to near extinction. Running, Bear pokes the fire with a stick. "Your people think the land is something to own," he says softly, "but the land owns all of us." You stare into the flames, realizing you've spent weeks walking through his history without ever seeing it. A woman brings you a bowl of stew corn, canes, bits of venison. It tastes better than anything you've eaten since arriving. You thank her, though your voice feels small. Quirky tidbit time in some frontier towns. Settlers and native families actually lived side by side, trading food, medicine, and tools. There were friendships, even marriages, but those stories rarely made it into the Wild West myths. They weren't exciting enough for publishers. As you eat, a group of young men ride back into camp, leading to weary horses loaded with hides. They glance at you curiously, but say nothing. You feel like an intruder in someone else's dream. Historians still argue whether peaceful coexistence was ever truly possible. Some point to trade partnerships and mutual respect. Others say the power imbalance made conflict inevitable. The truth the horizon keeps shifting when you try to pin it down. After a while, Running Bear stands. "You'll ride west tomorrow," he says, "but remember what you saw." You nod, unsure what he expects you to do with that memory, but you feel the weight of it settle somewhere deep. Night falls over the camp like a blanket of ink. You lie near the fire, listening to the rhythmic beat of a drum in the distance. It's not music for entertainment. It's something older, steadier, like the pulse of the earth itself. You close your eyes, feeling both small and connected. Joke number 2. You came to the West looking for adventure and found philosophy, instead bad trade. It's a great story. At dawn, you rise. Running Bear is already awake, watching the sun climb. "Ride carefully," he says. "There are soldiers to the south. They don't see much difference between one stranger and another." You nod, thank him, and mount your horse. As you ride away, you glance back once. The camp is already fading into the landscape, swallowed by the light, like it was never there. By midday, you spot the soldiers he warned about, blue uniforms, rifles glinting, a flag rippling in the wind. They stop you, ask where you're coming from. You tell the truth, and their expressions shift. One spits in the dust. "You best steer clear of those camps," he says coldly. "We've got orders to move them north." "Move them?" You ask, though you already know. He nods. "Government says it's for their safety." You want to argue, to say something righteous, but the soldier's eyes harden. You realize this is a conversation that's been lost 1,000 times before. You tip your hat and ride on. The rest of the day feels different. The land's still vast, the sky is still beautiful, but now it feels haunted, not by ghosts, but by silence. You begin to see traces everywhere, circles of blackened stones from old fires, faint trails cutting through the grass, stories left behind by people forced to disappear. Historians still argue whether expansion was destiny or disaster. Manifest destiny. They called it a phrase that turned conquest into prophecy. But out here, staring at the empty prairie, destiny just feels like an excuse. That night, you make camp alone. The stars are sharp and endless again. You sit by your small fire, thinking about Running Bear's words. The land owns all of us. You look down at your boots, caked in dust that isn't yours, okay? And realize how right he was. Joke number 3. You thought the Wild West was about conquering nature, but it turns out you're the one being conquered, one blister at a time, as sleep drifts closer. You hear coyotes calling across the plain, their cries echoing like ancient laughter. Somewhere out there, someone else is riding through the dark, chasing the same myth you are. You wonder if they'll ever see what you saw, if they'll just keep looking west, chasing the promise that never was. By now, the rhythm of the Wild West has seeped into your bones, dust in your lungs, sun in your skin, a faint ache in every muscle that no modern chiropractor could fix. You've stopped checking your reflection in the creek because honestly, it's no longer reassuring. You look less like a traveler and more like a side character in a morality play about hygiene. Still, you press on westward, chasing the fading rumor of a better place to stop. Maybe even settle. It's been days since you left the soldiers behind, and the landscape has changed again. The flat plains have given way to jagged canyons and red rock spires that stab the sky like broken teeth. The air smells of pine and stone, dry and sharp, and you can taste the distance between yourself and civilization. Your horse limps slightly, but keeps moving, loyal, stubborn, or too tired to argue. You hum softly, the same way you did as a kid when you were scared but didn't want to admit it. The Wild West doesn't offer comfort. It offers momentum. Stop too long. Can't. It swallows you whole. You spot a mining camp tucked into the hills, a scatter of tents and rough-hewn cabins buzzing with noise and desperation. Pickaxes clanged against rock. Shovels scrape, and men shout over the din, chasing fortune one glittering fleck at a time. You tie your horse near a water trough and step into the chaos. A wiry miner with a beard that could conceal small wildlife nods at you. Looking for work or whiskey? Whichever pays better, you answer. He laughs, a sound like gravel being crushed. Then you're in the wrong place for both. Mainstream historical fact. During the gold and silver rushes of the 19th century, mining camps sprouted like mushrooms after rain, temporary towns full of dreamers, drifters, and outlaws. For every one person who struck it rich, 100 more died poor, buried under rock or debt. You wander through the camp, watching men sift mud through pans, hoping to spot a sparkle worth dying for. It's hypnotic, almost Sada slow-motion lottery with pickaxes instead of tickets. Nearby, a man is selling supplies from a wagon, shovels, pans, rope, and oddly enough, jars of pickles. Good for scurvy, he shouts. Better than teeth. Quirky tidbit time. In real mining towns, pickles and lemons were luxury items because vitamin C was scarce. Some miners spent more on preserved vegetables than on tools. Others just accepted losing their teeth as part of the job description. You buy a jar out of curiosity and crunch into one. It's sour, crisp, and probably the healthiest thing you've eaten in weeks as evening falls. The miners gather around fires, telling stories and swatting mosquitoes the size of walnuts. Someone strums a banjo with missing strings. Someone else passes a bottle. The air buzzes with laughter and bitterness. The two main exports of the American frontier. Historians still argue whether these mining booms represented progress or plunder. On one hand, they drove technological innovation and westward expansion. On the other, they left behind ghost towns, poisoned rivers, and scars across the land that still haven't healed. You stare into the fire, thinking about all the things people will do for glitter in the dirt. One of the miners tells you about a man named Mad Jack who struck gold nearby, then vanished before spending a single coin. Said he saw something up in the hills, the man says. Something, watching him. The others laugh it off, but you can't shake the thought. You've learned not to dismiss ghost stories out here. They're usually just history with the names rubbed off. The next morning, curiosity wins. You pack your things and follow a narrow trail up the canyon, past scrub and sage. The air grows cooler, the silence thicker. You spot an old shaft, half buried in rock and debris. A lantern still hangs by the entrance, swaying faintly. You should turn back, of course. That's what the sensible voice in your head says. The problem is, that voice sounds tired and a little too reasonable. You duck inside. The tunnel smells of damp earth and regret. Your footsteps echo. You see old timbers, rusted tools, and a discarded boot. Farther in, you notice strange markings on the wall symbols carved into the stone. Not by miners, but by someone older. Historians still argue whether indigenous rock carvings in mining regions were warnings, sacred signs, or early records. Some scholars say miners often ignored them until it was too late. You stare at the markings lines that spiral and intersect, like a map of something you can't quite read. For a second, you swear you hear a whisper, faint as wind through stone. Then the ceiling creaks. Dust falls. You scramble out just in time as a section of rock collapses behind you, sealing the tunnel shut. Your heart races, your hands shaking. Joke number 1. Congratulations, you've officially survived your first cabin. The prize, lifelong claustrophobia. You stumble back down the trail, gulping sunlight like water. By the time you reach camp, your legs feel like sandbags. The miners laugh when they see your face. Guess Mad Jack's ghost didn't like company, one says. You don't correct him. You just sit by the fire, staring into the flames again, wondering how many people came west thinking they'd change the world and ended up buried under it instead. Night settles in, the canyon glowing under a wash of moonlight. You lie awake, listening to the wind whistle through the rocks. The distant clang of a pickaxe still echoing somewhere in the dark. The world feels both endless and small, like you're camping inside a giant heartbeat. Joke number 2. The Wild West keeps giving you near-death experiences. Kaisa. In the early hours, a storm rolls in thunder, rumbling across the cliffs, lightning illuminating the camp in bursts. The miners rush to secure tents, shouting over the wind. You huddle under your blanket, counting seconds between flashes and thunder. And in that chaos, something shifts inside you. Maybe it's the adrenaline, maybe exhaustion, but for the first time, you stop thinking about surviving a day in the Wild West. You realize you've been surviving for weeks and, somehow, you've adapted. You're still soft by frontier standards. Sure, you'd lose any fight involving actual skill or grit, but you've learned to read the sky, to ration water, to sense when danger's coming. You've learned that the real enemy out here isn't outlaws or rattlesnakes, it's hubris, thinking you can bend this land to your will. Joke number 3. You came looking for adventure and accidentally signed up for existential humility. By dawn, the storm has passed. The camp is quiet again, the air washed clean. You look out at the canyon, sunlight breaking through the clouds, and for the first time, you understand why people stayed, despite everything. It wasn't just the gold. It was the idea that maybe, just maybe, it could carve a life out of this impossible place and leave behind something that lasted longer than dust. You tighten your saddle straps, take one last look at the camp, and ride on. You don't know what's waiting beyond the next ridge, but you know this much. The Wild West doesn't care if you survive, but it does care if you notice. By the time you reach the coast, the Wild West feels like it's lived several lifetimes inside your bones. The air smells different here, salt instead of dust, seaweed instead of sage. Waves crash against jagged cliffs, and gulls wheel overhead, their cries slicing through the wind. You've made it, technically. You've gone as far west as west goes. But there's no triumphant fanfare, waiting, no golden city, no cheering crowd. Just the soft hiss of the ocean swallowing the edge of the continent. You tie your horse near a scrubby patch of grass and walk toward the water, boots sinking into sand. The Pacific glitters under the afternoon sun, endless and indifferent. After all that chaos, it's almost unsettling to see something so calm. You sit down, exhausted, letting the surf wash over your boots. You think about everyone you've met along the way. The bartender with her sharp wit and sharper eyes. The sheriff who never got enough sleep. The railroad workers hammering their way toward a dream. The ranchers, the preachers, the gamblers, and the ghosts. You think of Running Bear and his quiet wisdom. The miners chasing illusions in the dirt. The soldiers who didn't know mercy from duty. Each of them was part of the same vast experiment. What happens when hope collides with wilderness? Mainstream historical fact. By the late 1800s, the frontier was officially declared closed. The U.S. Census of 1890 recorded that there was no longer a clear line between settled and unsettled land. Frederick Jackson Turner later argued that this frontier had defined the American spirit, rugged, independent, restless. Historians still argue whether that's a myth or a mirror. You chuckle softly. Spirit sounds generous. The Wild West didn't shape you into a hero. It ground you down until you finally listened. Out here, survival isn't about outgunning the next guy or finding fortune. It's about understanding your smallness against something eternal. You glance at your reflection in the surf, sunburned, wind-chapped, hair wild as tumbleweed. You look like someone who's seen things too big to explain. Joke number one. If Instagram existed back then, you'd have exactly one follower and it'd be your horse. You walk along the beach, spotting driftwood tangled in kelp, a few shells glinting like coins from another world. The tide licks at your heels, patient and slow. Every story ends somewhere, and this feels like the edge of all of them. You find a piece of smooth wood and carve something into it with your Nifa simple line. Nothing poetic, just your name and the date. Then you toss it into the water, watching it drift away, carried off by a current that doesn't care where you've been. Quirky tidbit time in the 19th century. Sailors and settlers sometimes tossed drift letters into the ocean, messages in bottles carrying news, confessions, or prayers. Some washed ashore years later, found by strangers who'd never know the writer's face. Maybe yours will too. You sit back down and let your mind wander. The Wild West wasn't just a place. It was a fever dream. 1,000 people came chasing freedom and ended up finding responsibility. Others came for wealth and found emptiness. And just a few found peace in the quiet moments, between gunfire and dust storms. It's when the world paused long enough for them to breathe. Historians still argue whether the West ever truly ended. Some say it lives on in the highways and the oil fields, in Hollywood cowboys and political speeches. Others say it's just nostalgia dressed in leather boots. But as you sit here, watching the horizon blur into mist, you think maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe the West never ended because it wasn't a place, it was a lesson. You pick up a small stone, smooth and cool, and turn it over in your hand. You think about how much of human history can fit into something so small. Fights, dreams, lies, faith. You slip it into your pocket as a reminder. You made it through, not because you were tough, but because you learned when to stop fighting the land and start listening to it. Joke number two. You didn't conquer the Wild West, you just outlasted it on technical terms. A breeze picks up, carrying the cry of gulls and the faint scent of pine from inland. You close your eyes, breathing deeply. You imagine all the people still out there, settlers, breaking new ground. Trains chugging westward, saloons clattering with music and glass, campfires glowing like stars across the plains. The story continues without you, just as it always has. You laugh softly at the thought of your old self, the one who thought you could survive a day in the Wild West. You didn't survive a day. You survived its truth, that it was never about winning, just enduring. Joke number 3. If history were a test, you'd get a passing grade barely, but at least you showed your work. You stand, brushing sand from your clothes, and turn to look inland one last time. The horizon is hazy, but you can almost see the echoes of every place you've been to these crooked streets. The ranch under a bleeding sunset, the railroad slicing through the plains, the desert where mirages shimmered like broken promises. All of it lives in you now, stitched together with dust and memory. The tide creeps closer, erasing your footprints. It feels right, somehow. The West doesn't leave monuments. Sit leaves stories, half true and fully alive. You whisper, so long, to no one in particular, and the wind carries it away. The waves slow, rolling in gentle and steady, as if the ocean itself is breathing you out of its story. The sun dips lower, softening from gold to rose, and the air cools. Every sound, the hiss of foam, the creak of your saddle behind you, the lazy cry of a bird far out to sea stretches into something quiet and timeless. You take one last deep breath. The salt settles on your tongue. The horizon blurs into watercolor, and all the sharp edges of the day begin to fade. Whatever dust and noise clung to you from your time in the West drifts away now, carried off like smoke in the evening breeze. The land, the people, the hunger, the laughter, they all become distant ripples, merging into something peaceful. For a moment, there's no you and no history, just the hum of the world turning as it always has. You close your eyes. You imagine the stars rising above the desert again, the coyotes singing to the moon, the crackle of a campfire far away. Everything that once felt harsh now feels soft, patient, eternal. The wind tugs gently at your sleeve, almost like a lullaby. You smile, finally, because you understand what the Wild West has been trying to tell you all along, that every frontier or imagined eventually leads back to stillness. And with that, you let the story settle, the way sand settles after a wave retreats slowly, quietly, perfectly calm. Sleep well, traveler. You made it home.